a lot of people, I don't know if they necessarily always want to talk about it, but it's something suddenly many of us, if we are not facing now, may face in the very near future. And here to help us with the some thoughts on being a caregiver, particularly when it comes to elderly parents, is Jeffrey Schoener out of New Princeton, New Jersey. How are you, Jeffrey?
I'm doing well. Hi, Mike.
Thank you so much for being here. And you have taken it upon yourself to sort of lay some groundwork here to not only help people sort of understand what it takes to be a caregiver for someone else, but also how to keep caring, how not to sort of get burned out in that. And I know that's probably one of the keys. I'm sure when you give your talks and when you help people, one of the things is after a period of time of doing this for somebody and feeling like it's all on you, how do you keep from getting burned out?
That's a very good question. Most people will start feeling burnt out a lot of times when they feel unappreciated or underappreciated.
Right.
Let's face it. If it continues to be a labor of love, then the energy elements are still there. In a real sense, we have to kind of, in service, play some mental games. That will kind of keep us from being burnt out. I actually have an audio product for, I call it our professional edition of the Caregivers Relief Kit, that deals specifically with burnout rewind.
Right.
Once a person is approaching burnout, there are one set of skills. Once a person is already there, they have to either rewind or make some other arrangements.
Let's just backtrack. We'll rewind ourselves a little bit. Let's just go back to the point of because I think a lot of us sort of, as soon as you say caregiver, a lot of us are immediately, I'm there feeding an elderly parent, or I'm there feeding a very sick, partner or whatever, and I'm there, changing linens. I mean, it really goes to that sort of that really hands-on. But you would suggest there's lots of other types of caregiving, and that you can just as equally sort of burn out from doing that.
Absolutely. My definition personally of caregivers are anybody who takes care of any other living thing. So that anybody in uniform, anybody in who are doctors and nurses, for example, who are specifically trained in certain areas, will compartmentalize and go through certain elements. At the same time, if they're feeling overwhelmed, if they're feeling the pressures, if they're feeling burnt out, then as the caregiver, as the care recipient, there's a lot to be easily missed and overlooked. You also had mentioned about the elderly. That's one of the biggest reasons for elder care abuse and nursing home abuse.
Yeah.
When you also consider things like family caregivers, there's a lot of frustration that goes on in that no matter what we do. Now, I've done this myself for my parents. It's really very difficult in that however you compartmentalize, there's still a part of you that still has to think about them and care about them, and even if you're out shopping for, say, shoes for you still have to consider them.
Well, I hope I don't offend anybody with this comment, but at the same time, I think that I've noticed or perceived, at least in a few different people I know who work in the healthcare profession, and these would be like sort of frontline kind of things, and maybe a nurse or somebody of that nature, who almost, to me, I sometimes get the sense that they sort of disconnect themselves, and I don't want to say they're cold people, but I get a sense that they sort of disconnect themselves from allowing themselves feelings towards these things. Is that a way to deal with this, or is that maybe a symptom of maybe not dealing with this right?
It's a little of both, actually. The compartmentalization that they do, they put their emotions on hold so that they can go through their specific checklist.
Right.
Is in a sense what they do. They, especially for professionals who have a huge amount of information and a huge amount of steps to go through. Unfortunately, once their emotions start creeping in, and if it gets a little personal for them, It could be anything from a labor dispute to something that they had for breakfast that didn't sit well with them. Some of those steps might easily be missed.
Mm-hmm. If you don't watch yourself, if you're a caregiver, and you know, I think that we sort of, many of us, and especially depending on what age you're at, but as your parents sort of move on and they get into their, 60s, 70s, maybe even their 80s, and they're still doing well, and they're, taking basically care of themselves, and really being a caregiver to them means popping by once in a while and maybe moving some heavy stuff for them or whatever. Mm-hmm. But then suddenly there can be a real change, and I would guess that a lot of us aren't really prepared for this idea that at some point it may suddenly dawn on us that somebody else's life, it really hangs on us. I mean, that if we're not there regularly, if we don't look after all, as you said, go down the checklist on a regular basis, that potentially the person whose life hangs in the balance is somebody who we love dearly.
Yes.
That kind of pressure, not having any kind, and we sort of, I guess, go into these things without any training. I mean, nobody's ever taught us how to handle some of this stuff.
That's very true, and a lot of it has to do with familial obligations. I've spoken to many people, in fact, who are long-distance caregivers.
Right.
Who they have to check in by phone and literally pay for somebody to go through the care and then check back to how they're doing, because they have their own lives to lead.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of sad, especially when now I work also with people who have Parkinson's disease, and I'm making inroads to caregivers for different elements of other dementia like Alzheimer's. And it's really very sad when a person is physically no longer the same or mentally no longer the same. There's a grieving process that happens earlier on, and a lot of times we're not even aware of it. It really does emotionally take its toll.
Jeffrey's website is neuro-enhancement.com. He has the Caregivers Relief Kit, which offers up lots of different ideas and tips on how to avoid things. And I guess, is this much like, Jeffrey, is the cycle when you talk about caregivers and how they, a lot of us go through a very predictable cycle of frustration and then resentment and then even our own depression. Is it very predictable what you see?
Actually, it is. It's absolutely human nature. And first, let me say that for people who don't remember where to put the dash, they can also get there by going to experiencenes.com. Experiencenes.com. Right.
Okay.
And one of the things that I do in my product and my teaching is that I specifically avoid a lot of those steps, and I go right to the heart of what they're feeling, and give them skills so that they can deal with them in the moment.